Thank you very much, Jim, for this introduction and for the opportunity to be here this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, it's the last presentation for this afternoon. I can feel that everybody needs some coffee, so I ask you to please bear with me, and I'll try to be quick and simple. The UN RED program, as a quick introduction, is a program with 3 agencies within the UN. So the FAO, the United Nations Development Program, and the United Nations Environment Program. And in combination, we try to support the various governments that we work for in developing and setting up this RED Plus process. Today, I will speak to you about measuring, reporting, and verification. As a quick background, I think it's useful to always remember where we're coming from in the forestry sector or any sector in general. We've come from a very narrow forest concept where we've started to look at timber supply and commercial volumes to where over time we incorporated elements of biodiversity, sustainable forest management, and the last development has been climate change, RED, and carbon. Where we will next be is still a question, but what is sure is that we've come from a very narrow concept to a very broad integrated concept where we can now begin to think on landscape and ecosystem levels. Obviously, this has meant that we've had to be creative about how we deal with these evolving needs and demands from countries in various sectors. Both the approaches and the technologies have evolved. We've had to continuously adapt to new challenges, which is very interesting also, as we get to be very innovative and creative. What we also do is we try to build on robust and well-proven methodologies and tools and adapt these to a local context. Within this RED Plus context that I will speak to you about today, we do not have the luxury to try new methodologies in developing countries. We're very short on time, and we have to be able to deliver very robust systems. RED Plus, everybody's speaking about it. It's the new kid on the block, and we've spoken about it several times today, yet it is often misused or misrepresented in very different ways. So I would just briefly like to take a few minutes to come back to what exactly does this RED Plus mechanism mean. First of all, RED Plus is defined by 5 activities. So reducing emissions from deforestation is 1, forest degradation is 2, and then we have 3 other activities, of which are conservation, enhancement of forest carbon stocks, and the sustainable management of forests. This entire mechanism sits under a process of the United Nations Convention for Climate Change. And there are 2 decisions as of now that have been adopted on RED Plus. One is a methodological decision and one is a policy decision. The first one was adopted in Copenhagen and the second one was adopted in Cancun. What is crucial to understand about these texts is that they now represent international legal texts. Would a country wish to participate in a RED Plus mechanism under the UNFCCC, it has to follow these texts. It is not an option. This is in order to ensure the broader concept of the UNFCCC, which is that one of environmental integrity. Some key points that arise out of these legal texts that we should consider, as Jim said, is the use of international panel on climate change guidance and guidelines, very well demonstrated in Tanzania, for example. The setup of robust and transparent national forest monitoring systems incorporating, again, Tanzania is a very nice example. There's a 3-phased approach for RED that has been adopted. The first one is a readiness phase, the second one is demonstration activities, and the third one are result-based actions. Currently, most countries are in their readiness phase, and what the UN RED program does, for example, with other programs like the Forest Carbon Partnership Facility, are supporting the developing countries in setting up the process, so in getting ready for the RED Plus. What is important is that this last phase, the result-based action phase, is the phase that should be fully measured, reported, and verified. So this is the phase where the data gets to be checked very thoroughly, and where at the end of a commitment period, financial payments would be made. Last but not least is the question of safeguards. Safeguards with RED go from environmental integrity to the incorporation of all relevant stakeholders to the respect of indigenous peoples' rights. So basically what we have is a ladder. It's a huge ladder where we've been working historically, if you think of the previous slide, on different components, whether it's commercial volume, whether it's socioeconomics, and RED Plus brings this together from the highest political international negotiations to the lowest activity on the ground, and this to be done in each country. The UN RED program, what we try to do is to assist developing countries in the RED Plus process and to facilitate international cooperation, to support the countries through the development of the 3 RED Plus phases, to ensure capacity building and strengthening, and to set up national forest monitoring systems and MRV systems. The ultimate goal has to be to enable the countries to be fully responsible, autonomous, and in control of their RED Plus activities, monitoring, and MRV systems. Measurement, reporting, and verification. What does it really mean in a RED Plus context? So the M of the MRV is based on 2 pillars. The first pillar on your left is a national satellite forest monitoring system in which we try to assess forest area and forest area change. The second pillar is a national forest inventory through which one can assess carbon stock and carbon stock change, very specifically tailored to RED. If you think a little bit through, if you have your forest area and forest area change, your carbon stock and your carbon stock change, you can calculate your emissions or removals, which brings us to the second part of the MRV, which is the reporting. The combination of your emissions and removals, all this data is combined in something called a greenhouse gas inventory. This greenhouse gas inventory is then reported in a UNFCCC context to the UNFCCC Secretariat. Basically, you say, this is the data I have in my country, the forest carbon stocks, the emissions, and how we've measured everything. In the last part of this V, the UNFCCC Secretariat has a roster of experts, which it sends to the country. So you have basically reported your data, and here come 2 or 3 experts that come to evaluate your national system and your data. Sorry. It's definitely coffee time and beer time soon. So I'll wrap it up quickly. This MRV system is really key to RED. I want to jog your memories. Under the Kyoto Protocol, if you remember well, Greece was deemed that it was not following the KP guidelines. It was put out of the Kyoto Protocol. If your national system, your MRV system, does not follow what you're required to do under your responsibilities, you cannot receive any financial compensation and you will be put outside of the mechanism. So if a country like Greece has difficulties pulling it off, our responsibility here is to allow and help developing countries such as the Congo to set up such a system. Which brings me to the final part of the presentation for a quick case study on the Democratic Republic of Congo. Big country in Central Africa, the 2nd largest tropical forest country in the world. How do we take a process like RED Plus with everything that it requires and translate it into a national process? So we start by understanding the implications for a country and its national circumstances. Then we try to understand the institutional arrangements and responsibilities. Who is responsible for RED Plus in the country? What ministry? Is it different ministry? What directions? What are the existing capacity? How many people are there? Do they have a salary and are they paid? Can we rely on them to go into the field? Then, of course, RED has become a very sexy subject, and DRC, or the Congo Basin, has become a very sexy area. So you have a huge coordination challenge of the different stakeholders and the funding streams that are coming in, whether it are donors, private sectors, everybody wants a share of the pie. What we try to do is target the most urgent needs and, of course, try to ensure national appropriation of the process and the involvement of all local populations. Very quickly and specifically, some of the activities FAO does within the UN RED program in the DRC are 3 studies. One is the drivers of deforestation. So what are the drivers and causes of deforestation in the country? These are the real basis of understanding what REDD+ could mean. A carbon MRV. So how do we go about setting up an MRV system in this country and doing all the field measurements or the remote sensing analysis? We try to do this through an MRV roadmap where we bring everybody around the table, NGOs, stakeholders, private entities, and say, okay, how can you help us in this national process? What exists? And thirdly, a reference level, reference emission level, which is often miscalled baselines, which will be the negotiated level of the country within the UNFCCC of what its objectives will be or its targets. Very quickly, the drivers of deforestation study. What we've done is we've started with a period from 1990 to 2000 and 2000 to 2005. And we've used a sample-based remote sensing approach, which was described by colleagues before. What we can say is that deforestation rates are very, very low. We have a net deforestation between 1990 and 2000 of 0.20% and a net degradation of 0.12%. Now, what is important to understand in this country, why is it like this? Why is it that with such a huge forest resource, this is all, in quotation, that is going on? So we model the indirect and direct drivers of deforestation. Once we have done the above 2 points, which is the phase we're now, we developed a protocol for field validation of the sample sites and the drivers of deforestation. This we did together with civil society groups for both the development, and we are now in the execution phase where the teams are on the ground. On the MRV, I think I could spend half a day speaking about the MRV, but basically there are 3 important axes in the country. One is a political axe, the other is a technical, and the third is an operational axe. On the political level, the institutional setup and responsibilities are very important. If you don't get this clear, we cannot even begin thinking about an MRV system in the country. The donor coordination, again, is very important. Everybody has a different agenda. Everybody would like a stamp at the end of the day saying, we funded this or we did this. So that coordination is a huge percentage of our time. Technical, the development of the methodology. So we're not quite at the stage of Tanzania, for example, where they've already started all the work and we're still thinking and learning from existing projects. Training. We're starting from almost zero, whether it is botanical training, field measurement, data entry, analysis, remote sensing techniques. Operational, think of the DRC, think of this big country, think that it has a very weak infrastructure. How do we go about deploying field teams? What equipment do we need? Do we need a boat? Do we need a motorcycle? Do we need a car? Do we send teams into the field for 1 week to walk, to measure 3 plots? How do we go about all this? So very complex system, but this is the phase we're in for the moment. We've been doing this program for about 2 years now in the DRC and trying to help the government, and we've learned a lot of important lessons, which I think we can use in general beyond the DRC for REDD+ and forest monitoring. If it is to do, like for example in Tanzania, the work that has been done, you need a really strong presence in the country during your readiness phase. The support to the government with the coordination of the activities to ensure the complementarity of projects rather than competing initiatives is key. I can say a few weeks ago we organized the first big meeting in DRC on the MRV roadmap where we put all the donors together, private sectors and NGOs. It was a full day meeting and I can tell you it was very heated. So once you come to that point, who will interfere at one point to tell these donors or private sector or NGOs, listen, there is a national process, you can do what you want to do, but if you want to help this country, then we expect X, Y, and Z from you. We also need to be very flexible to adjust to the rising needs and questions within the targeted activities. As we go along, many questions arise that originally we hadn't thought of. Within those activities, with the very limited budgets that we have and the very limited time, we have to be very clear on the prioritization of the activities. We should also accept that it's a learning by doing process. Everybody's learning, whether it are donors, the country, or the agencies trying to support the country. But we do need to keep in mind that we have to move forward and produce results, such as results that are being produced in Tanzania. Last but not least, prepare for the unexpected. Unfortunate results in Japan have shown us that we never know what's around the corner. DRC has a very different context, and on a political and socio-economic level, I think all of you know it's a very difficult situation to work in. Right now, we have what we can call near optimum conditions in the country to do the work we are doing, but this may change very fast, and you never know when. So we really need to bear that in mind and do as much as we can when we have the opportunity to do so. Finally, thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to receiving some of your questions. Thank you.